Well, hello everybody. Hope you're settled in and comfortable. So my name is Michael and I'm working for the Danish Sector Cert. I'm going to be doing a presentation of an attack that we saw last year. But a few things first. I was paying attention to Dale speak, and he was talking about sometimes we're not perfect and we should acknowledge that. And I think it's fair to say that even though sector certs, it sounds huge and grand, we're actually only 13 people covering a country the size of state of Delaware, 5.8 million. So the resources, of course, are limited in some extent, but we still manage to do, and as Dale said, embrace the fact that you sometimes do things good enough to be able to speak about a success, and this is actually a success. And then, to quote Rob M. Lee, attribution sucks, right? I mean, it can be hard. It is hard because it takes a lot to really pinpoint. And for us, that doesn't really matter. And I mean, how many actually read the report that we came out with? That's a good quarter. Good. Because, I mean, yeah, some people wrote another report kind of alluding to the fact that we could have done better, and we probably could, but we're all learning, right? But I'll still say that anyone that put our report up next to Mandian and then bitch on both of them will take it any day, right? I mean, that's a stamp of acknowledgement that you're compared to Mandian, so thanks for that, Force Scout. So, anyway, this is... We're a non-government, non-profit organization, so we are member-driven. So that means that the trade organizations actually paying for our jobs. So all our members, so it's not clients, it's not customers, our members, they're actually paying through their fees in those trade organizations. So we cover wastewater, water, electricity, or energy as we call it. District heating and transport, and we have a little more than close to 400 member organizations, and as mentioned, 588 million people. So, and of course, we now just had sensors deployed on Greenland, so we're actually now covering all of the Danish realm, which is, besides Denmark, the Faroe Islands, and then now Greenland. This next one shows you the coverage, at least on the Danish mainland and Faroe Island. It's hard to put Greenland in there, but there's a couple of sensors in Greenland as well. But just to show you how much coverage we have and how much visibility that actually gives us. So when we do the report and we create the kind of the conclusions we do, it's based on this. We got a little more than 300 companies covered. It's a simple NSM IDS solution based on a Linux distribution with the Suricata and Seek and Corelight on top of it. And it's actually mostly deployed on the outside of these members' demarcation, firewall, whatever edge point they have. And that means we see a lot of ingoing and outgoing traffic. And that's basically what we do. We monitor. And then if we see something, because we get alerts, of course, we call them up and say there's something fishy going on in Denmark. So please check it, right? Check it or verify it. And then hopefully they can call us back and say that's a false positive or it's a vendor doing something again. And mostly it is, but sometimes we get lucky and it's more serious. And of course, that's what we have here. So a lot of what we do in this community is about collaboration, and we can't win the battle without collaboration. So this is to give you an idea of how we collaborate with others. So, of course, there's a couple of government agencies that the authorities and regulatory bodies that we interact with. Our own national, the NC3 here in the middle for the police, is the National Cyber Crime Center. Yeah, there it is. And of course, a couple of other police institutions that are relevant. Others are the ICS, FIRST, ENC, TALOS, EASE. And as you can see, there's a lot of certs there, mainly in Europe, but a couple of others interesting. And thanks for that, because that's where we share our observations, our threat intel. We also gain it. So, and then locally in Denmark, we have some critical Danish institution who covers some of the sectors as well, and we work close with them as well. So you're here for the case, and let's look what that is about. So in May 23, we had 22 companies compromised at the same time. Comes in waves, actually. And we detected that something was going on, started to alert, started to realize that this is actually a critical incident. So entered into a state of emergency, launched our incident response scheme, and started to work closely with these companies. At some point, now I'll get back to the timeline, we saw possible involvements of state actors. So back to the comment about, yeah, attribution sucks. So we saw it. No matter what anybody else says, we saw it. But going back to, can we be sure? No, we cannot, because it's a simple IP and it's a single IP. It's just been known to be attributed to other or to a state actor. They were very prepared, and I'll get through the details later, and it was a very, in our opinion, coordinated attack, and I'll also get into that. So on April 25th, there was a critical vulnerability released from Sicel, and it was 9.8 on a scale from 1 to 10. And in Denmark, there's a lot of those guys out there. It's a firewall, and it was vulnerable, so no big surprise in that. We send out a warning because that's part of our job. If we see adversaries as critical enough, we share that information with our close community. And we saw a few notes from some of our partners that there were attacks in other countries, but not much actually at that point. So we were anxiously awaiting that one. And this is actually the box. It's not big, it's not grand, and I know from the comments we saw worldwide that how would you consider protecting critical national infrastructure with a box like that? But the reality of it is that a lot of these installations throughout rural areas in Denmark is very small installations. A couple of PLCs, a computer, maybe two. And in that sense, this box actually fits right in. Price, technology. Of course, you need to configure it correctly, and that might have been the problem for some of them. But anyway, I mean, you don't buy a big Cisco box for those small installations because they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the money, and they don't have the support power. So it wouldn't make sense for them. And that's part of a reality. I was watching the congressional hearing that Rob Emily and Dr. Morley and Marty Edwards and the fourth guy I can't remember a couple of weeks ago, and I think they were alluding to some of the same issue that you also in the States have rural areas where the knowledge or the power of the resources is scarce, and so it doesn't make sense. You probably have the same issue. But of course, as we all know, basic hygiene is important. If you don't configure these boxes correctly, they have vulnerabilities and you'll end up getting hurt at some point. But that's the sucker. So wave one. There's a lot of pressure going on here. So this is the first wave we see. So we see 16 different members getting hit. And we can see from a list that we have that these must be carefully selected because they are part of a group that we would consider prime targets, knowing what we know, of course, about our own national infrastructure. So, of course, that's the first indication we get that something is going on that might allude to the fact that it's a targeted attack. Because, I mean, there were 400 to pick, but they took these 16. Now, that was the first question we started asking. Second, it's a very silent attack. A single packet sent, and we'll get back to that. And that actually compromised these boxes. And that means that you're probably dealing with an adversary who knows what they're doing and kind of focused their resources to put the power where they need it to be and nothing more. And sending one packet, normally, probably lucky enough, would just run through the filters. But we were lucky that we saw it and we were able to react on it. Out of the 16, 11 one was compromised, and we entered into the incident mode and created a team. It's worth knowing that I claimed we were 13 people, but at that time they were not more than 8 people actually working. So that means that, I mean, that's all hands on deck. You put aside whatever you do, and then this is where we focus 24/7 as long as it takes. Because some of these smaller rural installations, now small, how can that be important? Yeah, but remember, you can have a small installation somewhere in a rural area that actually covers a hospital, and that becomes important. So they were pretty, they needed help. And at the end of it, we actually managed to help them rescue and thwart the attacker. And we had no indication of a compromise into the OT. So this was standard and expected. They hit IT, and then luckily there were no privilege escalation or lateral movement, no signs of anything. So we were like, oh, but that came close, and that's an eye-opener for anybody, right? So a few days hard work, and we ventured out at the end saying, oh, that came close, but seems to be over. I promised you the one-liner. This is actually how easily it was done, and there's, oh, I can't see the screen, there it is. So there's a picture from Splunk, and what happened was actually that they were able to upload new ELFs to the firewall, and in that way present a vulnerability which made them get access and come in and get admin rights on the firewall, and from there they could have moved further in. We saw signs that they tried, but they never actually made it. Another thing you also need to realize is that some of those smaller companies, now it's a firewall, yes, and they're in IT, but there is, and I know some people are waiting for me to say this, those companies do not have the Purdue model implemented. So yeah, nice run. So those were flat networks, and that's the reality that we're also facing and dealing with, and you are all dealing with, that there are still installations out there that are pretty flat. So they get hurt quickly if they get hurt. But we managed to detect it, we managed to push them out, redeploy new firmware, close off all the web interfaces, new passwords and all that. And everybody was kind of monitoring and waiting to see, did we miss something, right? What else is going to happen? But it ended up that this was what we saw, and we pushed them back, and that was it, we thought. So on May 22nd, a week later, wave 2. And this is where it gets interesting. So it's definitely a new threat actor because they're using a new vulnerability, and it's not public at this point. So that's another point where we say, okay, and it's 11 new companies that they compromise. And when we look at that combined list of 22 companies, those were the 22 companies we would exploit if we needed to do something bad on a nation scale. So we need to take that into our consideration. And also the fact that these guys come in and they're using a new vulnerability that no one knows about. We didn't even know about it at that point. That was a new thing. And then later on, of course, we saw that single IP address which popped up as a red alert in our CM because that was attributed to previous sandworm activity. And that's not saying that it's sandworm, right? It could be rented, borrowed, they could have shifted it, whatever. But at some point in history, sandworm had that IP address. And looking at all the other indicators, we were kind of, this can get interesting now. And also, of course, there's the geopolitical things going on in Europe right now. So, and we're actively supporting our friends in Ukraine. So there was indication here. So and I need to get a little bit closer because this is a bad. So on first member get exploited and they go into island mode. And our interpretation of island mode is that they cut off their internet connection and then they run operations as far as they can on that, also especially on the OT side, right? And they can run for a long time. But there are certain services that they offer to the public, which is then not able to deliver. And that, of course, in the long run is not a good story. So we're working hard and they're working hard to recover from the incident. A couple of hours later, the next one is in there, and half an hour later, third member, and then on actually the day after, Sixel actually releases the vulnerability alert that we've realized that there's something else that you need to know. Thank you guys, we know already because. And then 3 more members were compromised on that same day in the morning. In the afternoon, 7th member, and then at around 7 o'clock in the evening, we see the 8th member being compromised, and that's where the IP address that are trying to get in or actually succeeding is previously known to be a sandworm thing. And we see another one at almost 1:30 in the night for the 9th one. And 2 more we find next morning. And that's when we call the police. And of course, at that point, we realized that this might get bigger and bigger. So we involved the local police. And also, we start to deliver whatever malware files we've seen, the ELFs and stuff. And malware analysis is started. And of course, and all the companies are cooperating with the authorities, and you know the drill. So that's basically wave 2 for you, and it's actually the end of it. That's all we see, but it's enough. And then on May 31st, we see widespread attacks, POCs on the new exploit, and we hear from all our partners that, we are getting hit. And we see all our members in that period also getting hit. So that's, at that point, it's definitely not target. It's just shoot. So I think that's fair to say that as we saw it, as it was played out in front of our eyes, it was definitely a targeted attack. And yeah, there were a lot of others attacked very close by after, maybe by the same, maybe by others. As we don't have the visibility into the other countries, we will never know because they don't share, not that much anyway. So, but from a country perspective, that it's still our belief, and we will still stand up for the conclusion that this was a targeted attack against national critical infrastructure. And that's how we saw it, that's how it played out. We might have been lucky to detect it and being able to push them out. There are a couple of other conclusions you can make on this. One of the things is that, we had 6 or 7 companies go into island mode. So how long can you sustain usable service of critical national infrastructure services? If you have all your companies in island mode, how long do the society actually sustain normal operations? So I think there's an important point here to be taken out of all this, that maybe somebody were just probing to see how far, I mean, do we have to attack? Or can we just poke at them and they will go into island mode and then eventually shut down, and then we've done the job? I mean, that might be somebody, trying out phases for attack patterns that we might yet have to see. And of course, the widespread attacks, the exploits were released for the vulnerability. POCs came out all over the place, all over the world. All our members attacked. It was no longer targeted. But no one actually got compromised at that point, because we already knew that the way to handle that one is just to update. Big surprise. So there's some lessons to be learned here. Of course, the fact that we actually have this widespread visibility, the network of sensors that we actually achieved out there, made it possible for us to detect it and also see the connections. If you're monitoring a single company or a single sector, you will have part of the picture, part of the visibility, but we actually are lucky enough to have most of it. As we are covering the biggest or the most important sectors, NIS2 is yet to come and define what is a critical infrastructure. But so there might be more. Also, quick reaction is imperative. I think everybody agrees to that. The sooner you detect and can do something, the sooner you can push them out. I mean, the higher up in the kill chain you see them and shove them out, that's where you want to be. And of course, the important thing, collaboration. So have your incident plans ready so you know who to call. Have that, do the tabletops and know your police partners or authorities. And also when you're working with the companies, you need to know all people. And of course, us being a small team, it's easier for us to know everybody and work closely with them because they know us on a daily basis or weekly basis. We'll have most of them in the phone anyway because we see something and we want to check it out. But it's important. And then, yes, systemic vulnerabilities are problematic, but that's no secret either. I think we've known that for a long time now. So it's basically it, and that's what happened. We, of course, do some reports and stuff like that. I think I mentioned that earlier on. And we have some recommendations. Again, we're not there to compete with the consultancies, so we give guidance. We don't do consultancy, so they're very broad, but they're based on the experience of the 3 years that we've existed as an entity. These are the basic hygiene things that we want to have them do. And work with. And of course, some of the bigger ones have their own security teams and SOCs and whatever, and they're way up there. But the smaller ones, they need this, so that's part of the duty. Our director, for anyone who wants official opinions and statements, that's his job. And of course, our reports and our documents are available if TLP cleared on our homepage. So that's about it, and we're close on timing as well. So I think we'll open the floor for questions. You need to go to the mic, and I'll be happy to answer questions if there are anyone.
Your island mode, was that a pre-planned event that you'd already worked out with everybody, or did each have their own individual islanding plan?
I'm not entirely sure, but I think that it had been discussed to some level that in case of emergency, yank the cable, right? So that was a general state of emergency that they knew they had to shield themselves from the public internet. So I think that's it.
And it was simple, just unplugging the cable then?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, a couple things. You'd mentioned that an NSM system would not have detected this, but it seems like you did detect it with an NSM system.
Yeah, but what I wrote in my abstract is that, I mean, in this case, actually, an OT NSM would have made a difference
Right,
because we
internet.
never saw anything OT, right? And they never got into OT. And I would claim that if we see them on an OT NSM box, it's too late, right?
Got it.
But at this point, we saw them coming into IT, and that was actually enough for us to react on it. And I think that's also an important lesson.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Michael. Thank you very much, and thanks for taking the
You're
question. You mentioned there was multiple companies that were impacted. How did you prioritize the recovery for which company? In terms of the actual fix itself, which was patching the firmware, did they do it themselves, or did the team get involved? How did you prioritize which company was given more assistance?
Well, our priority is that the smaller and less capable, the more we would focus on them. The bigger ones who had more muscle, we would just guide to call in a vendor, basically go to the internet and find a video that shows how you update. I mean, it was a fairly simple task. Just pull the firewall off the connection and then shut it down and then find the firmware, reload the firmware, re-image it, and then reconfigure it, and you're basically done, right? And then plug it in and hope for the best. So, but yeah, being such a small team, and had it been a bigger event with more impact on every company, they would have been forced to rely on their retainers for pure incident response, of course. So we recommend that the bigger ones have incident response retainers, because otherwise, I mean, we're only those hands, so we would have had to prioritize, and I think we probably did that to some extent, and then just said, yank the cable, you're safe, nothing else will happen, we'll get there eventually. Maybe in a couple of hours, maybe in a day. But so I think that's.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for giving that talk. It was really good. You mentioned briefly, I think kind of halfway through, that you thought it was a second threat actor based on having a different vulnerability. Is there something else big that made you draw that conclusion?
There might be a few things that I don't remember, so I'm not entirely sure. There were indications that it was handled a lot or very differently, and that sometimes you need to step back and look at that and say, so you have these two events, but they're very different. So that indicated that there were two, at least two.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Hi, Mikael. You have talked about critical infrastructure, talked about before the talk, it's also about energy systems, and now we're also talking about island mode. I'm curious about, is it actually electricity we are talking about, or what kind of critical infrastructure are we talking about? Because it's island mode commits in an electricity part, that's a specific domain and things we are doing in electricity to go in an island mode. But island mode can also be a part of, when you also read the report, what is island mode?
So let me put it this way. There were no services that were critical to the public that were not offered. There were administrative services that were not offered. So, and we are not allowed to tell you which kind of companies in which sector, but there were no services, electricity, water, anything that were not delivered as they should be. So there were no impact on OT, so to speak. And island mode means that the IT part was shut off, but all OT was still running, and that means that you could still push out and distribute electricity, water, you could have sewage, heating, everything was running.
Okay. It can be sometimes a bit confusing to use island mode and not have the right context. So.
To the point of the Forescout report I mentioned early on, I mean, of course, we're also learning and we're using terms that, we adjust later on, and we all get better at what we do, the more experience we get. So there might be points where we have to realize that using that term might not fit good to that kind of sector, so use another term. But I think most people grasp the fact that they're operating their own IT within that realm, and that means they have no internet access. But that doesn't mean that they cannot push out their services still, because they are physical services.
Yeah. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
sharing. Appreciate it.
That's about it.